Welcome to Speakernomics, the official podcast of the National Speakers Association. I'm Kenneth Kinney, but friends call me Shark. And like you, I'm a professional speaker and I love listening to Speakernomics. Speakernomics is a professional speaker show that will help you thrive and grow a speaking business so you too can change the world, one keynote session workshop and speech at a time. And on this episode, we welcome Julie Holmes. And who is Julie Holmes, you presume? Well, she is a fellow of the Professional Speaking Association of the United Kingdom and Ireland. That's PSA UKI for short, and has even been recognized as a Hall of Fame speaker, PSAE recipient. She is also a tech founder and AI speaker who started and built businesses, including SpeakerFlow CRM, Hey Mike, and her latest breakthrough, Stage Hopper. Julie, welcome to Speakernomics. How are you today?
I'm good, Shark. How are you?
Doing well, thank you. Now, all my speaking friends, shh, be quiet. Many of you are listening and waiting for the phone to ring. No dings or notifications with new emails coming with those speaking gigs you want. So what do you do when it's quiet, like crickets chirping quiet? Well, when there's just not enough leads, rebuilding your business and lead flow becomes critically important. And when it's quiet, it's something every speaker should consider, whether you're brand new or a seasoned pro. So how do you find those gigs, the ones that pay well? How do you create that great lead system? Is it just about hustling harder, working smarter, or both? How do you build a lead generation machine that helps you to speak, get paid, and repeat? And before we jump in, make sure to go to Speakernomics.com. That's where you can find the tips, insights, and knowledge to help you become a better speaker, build a better business, and get paid to speak. Julie, let's dive in. Number one, let's talk briefly about your own journey with how you rebuilt your speaking business. You had a business in speaking, and then you worked in the tech sector, had a company that went away, and then you had to rebuild it, kind of like what everybody went through with COVID even. But you had to start from scratch to some degree.
Yeah, I think that's a fair statement, a fair summary. So when COVID happened, my speaking business tanked like everybody else's. Luckily, I'm also a product creator, so I was able to lean on that. And then we moved abroad. So we left the States during COVID, beginning of COVID, we left the States and moved to the UK. And as I'm sure that there are other self-employed people who have experienced this, but I wanted to, we were going to buy a house in the UK, and it turned out they really wanted me to have a job for a mortgage. They wouldn't take any of my US revenue. And so I was like, I guess, with COVID anyway, I thought, now's a good time to get a job. So I went back into corporate and was leading product marketing and product strategy for a software company. And then when I decided I didn't want to do that anymore, I then went to work for a startup. And so I was spending most of my time on a startup. And when that startup didn't get funding, I had to make a big decision. And I can remember the day that I sat down with my mastermind, my speaker mastermind, and I have been with them for, I think we've been together probably 7 or 8 years now. And I sat down and said, well, here's my challenge. I've got to make a decision. What do I do now? Do I just go and get a job and kind of give up on speaking? Do I, go and work on another startup? Or do I kind of put all my cards on the table and I dive into speaking and I make that a business that works and that, it gives me the living that I want to make?
So what did you do to start rebuilding it? How did you go about that process of rebuilding it once you got back into speaking and away from that corporate startup?
So during that time that I left speaking, I let everything go fallow. So I didn't update my website. I took a few speaking gigs if they came inbound, but I did no outbound. I did no lead generation. I wasn't trying to build my network. I just basically let everything go quiet. And if anybody is listening right now and has let that happen, you probably can recognize that it goes quiet really fast. It doesn't take much for you to suddenly not hear from anybody anymore, like out of sight, out of mind. And I was definitely out of mind. And so to rebuild it, as soon as I made the decision that I was going to do that, I gave myself a window of opportunity and I said, right, 6 months. I'm going to give myself 6 months. If I can't build this business up in 6 months, then I am not going to do it. So it was, first of all, a really big decision point mindset shift to say, right, if I'm going to build this as a business, then I have to treat every decision I make like a business. I made a commitment to my husband that I would, I'm going to put everything I've got into this. Every decision I make was going to be on purpose. I don't run a business by accident. I don't believe in it. And so that was me sitting down and going, great, for me to do that means I have to sell. And I don't love to sell. I'm not bad at selling necessarily, but I don't love it. It isn't where I find my joy necessarily. Like many, I find my joy being on stage or creating content. But for me to do the things that I love means that I have to have the leads to be able to do that. And so it started off with, first thing I have to do is to make sure that I have all of the collateral and messaging and components that I need for that. All of that has to be in place. It took me about 3 weeks to get that all done. AI was immeasurably helpful in making that all happen. And then once I had that, I sat down and actually documented my lead generation strategy and all the different ways that I could go about finding leads. And then we started to work through that. So that was me working through all of those different lead generation strategies over time. We have turned that into kind of a quantifiable list, right? So these are the strategies we use. Here are the ones that are the best for me. Here's the ones that give me the best close rates. Here are the ones that give me the best return on investment. So that was kind of what I did. And then I treated lead generation as my business. And I made sure that while I was doing that, I systemized it in a way that even when I'm on the road, my team can continue to do the same thing.
Share a couple of them, how you did that though. Share once you found them and you had to do some outreach. I mean, it wasn't that you had all the systems. I think a lot of times I think about this when I hear other people, especially entrepreneurs and speakers, talk about lead gen. They focus on the incoming, they focus on the net, but there's that outreach. And as somebody that's been in sales and performance marketing most of my career, it's reaching out to them as opposed to, setting up a website with a nice form saying, book me to speak, and then you don't hear anything. And I think a lot of speakers, unfortunately, fall into that because they think that somebody's going to reach out to them all the time. And we build these elaborate systems to catch, and they do great. And there's nothing worse than when a lead doesn't get a quick response, or it just goes into a ether where it gets lost forever. That's important, but getting the lead to actually come in to get somebody to pay attention to you requires some outreach for most people in any business. So that's what I want to dig into a little bit was what did you start doing? Just picking up the phone and hitting emails with all the systems, kind of go into a little bit of detail of that.
Sure. So I think, and it's probably good to recognize that I consider inbound, and I realize I'm harder on myself than I think most people probably are or necessarily should be, but I almost consider every inbound lead gravy. Like it's just delightful. If I get an inbound lead, I'm always pleasantly surprised and purely delighted. Whether that inbound lead has come from a cold inquiry on my website, whether it's come from a bureau, to me, they're all like, oh, I wasn't expecting that. That's nice. I don't rely on it. Now the more we kind of get consistency, and especially in the market right now, I don't consider inbound to be highly consistent. So I know that for me to make the money that I want to make and have the business that I want to have means that I have to continually be doing outbound inquiries. And I'm always trying to expand what that looks like. So there's a couple different ways that we do it. So when I was coming up with my lead strategy, I recognized that there are 4 elements of a great lead. And the more information I can have on any one of these elements and the more accurate that information, that is to me a sweet, sweet lead. And the more reliable that information is, the better it is. Now, I can start from any one of the 4 elements and I can round out the lead, but stage 1 is finding the lead. And there are all different kinds of ways that you can find leads. So we've done, I call them, kind of the dirty dozen, which is my dirty dozen of lead sources. But the ones that are really focused on cold inquiries or, kind of cold outbound is around things like, oh, sure, I could go to Google and I could do a search for call for speakers. To me, that's kind of the weakest option because that one, I never know if they pay. I never know if it's legitimate. Like there's a million questions. So that's interesting, but it's not a great one. The second one is cold lead lists. So we've done cold lead lists in the past. We actually did them for 7 months where we were actively working cold lead lists. And these are like lead lists that you might subscribe to. And in fact, if you'd like me to share, we did our numbers in order to share them, but just to give people an idea of what that looks like in reality. So during the course of 7 months, we did, and I'm looking over here at my notes so I get the numbers right. We did 1,349 contacts in 7 months. It averages about 50 a week is kind of what it comes out to be. Some weeks were more, some weeks were less, but that was kind of the goal. Of that, it required us to do 6,316 touches. So we had a 4 email sequence plus a LinkedIn connection and message. So that kind of tells you what that model looked like. That generated for us about 505 communications. So 505 interchanges where we were going back and forth with a booker of some kind. And it generated, and this is where the numbers start to get really painful because it sounds really good at that point, right? Oh, those are great numbers. It generated 13 calls. So from those thousands and thousands of messages, it generated 13 calls. And it generated 3 closes. Now, there are 23 maybe in the futures, but we're still talking, double digits, right? We're still talking less than 50 actual results. So that's cold lead lists. That was another strategy that we tried. We stopped doing that because the conversion on that just isn't high enough to justify the cost. And then there's a couple other strategies that I used. So I did a lot with LinkedIn, not with necessarily posting on LinkedIn, because to me, posting on LinkedIn is a way to generate inbound leads, which is nice. But instead, we did a lot of LinkedIn outreach or using LinkedIn as a source of leads in order to then do email outreach. So I did that there's 2 kind of cool strategies around that. One is I got really clear on who my target market was. My primary market for outbound speaking, and it's really good, I think, for, when I think about my business, I had to sit down and think about who's my outbound target and then who do I actually sell to? Because if you think about something, I always talk about it as marketing like a minivan. So minivan companies and minivan manufacturers are really great at knowing who they sell to, and their marketing is really targeted and their messaging is really targeted. Like, they are not targeting an 18-year-old lad. Like, they are not building ads for an 18-year-old lad. So, but they would sell a car to an 18-year-old lad who came along and asked to buy one. And so that was my kind of, in my mind, I was like, oh, I need to wrap my head around that and be super clear of what does my outbound target market look like. So for example, my primary outbound target market is associations. And there's reasons why, but namely because I know that they're having events. I can see who they've booked in the past. I can tell a lot about an association organization by how they're set up and what they look like. And then I use that to generate corporate spin. But I don't do cold outbound to corporations because I'd have to find the right person. I never know when they're having an event. They don't typically advertise it. It's much harder to find the elements of a great lead. So for me, in LinkedIn, how that translates is I do 2 different kind of LinkedIn searches. The first one is I got super clear on what those target associations look like. How big are they? Where are they located? What do they have in their name? Like, what can I look for to identify what I think is an ideal association? And for example, I could tell you that most associations that book me and the ones that I would typically do cold outbound to would be associations that have at least 5 employees, because they need to be big enough to be running events that would hire a professional speaker. So usually they're going to have between 5 and plus employees at the association. And they're probably going to have somebody in their organization that has in their title, event planner, meeting, something like that. So that tells me that they've got somebody, they do enough events and their events are profile enough that they're going to have somebody in their organization that is focused on that. They might even be a CMP, right? A certified meeting professional. And so that is a way that I could identify which associations I wanted to do further research for. And then another LinkedIn strategy I would use is I can do what I call 2nd degree connection searches. So I'm connected to a lot of speakers on LinkedIn. Just has happened over the years. I'm connected to a lot of speakers on LinkedIn. If I go and look at my 2nd degree connections and I look for those associations, or I look for people with the word association in their company, and I look at just my 2nd degree connections, chances are they're a 2nd degree connection through a speaker. And if they're a 2nd degree connection through a speaker, and if that speaker happens to be a CSP or a PSA fellow, or you name it, right? Somebody who is kind of identified as a professional speaker, then chances are they're probably connected because they booked them. So that's just an example of how I would kind of, I want to say almost like dig my way into LinkedIn to find the right connections to then do outbound to. And of course, we have an outbound sequence that we use and an outbound process that's personalized, things like that.
You know, what I love too is you never hesitated when talking about the outbound that you do. And although you took a look at the math and you said, I'm not going to do this cold lead list anymore because of the effort, that makes sense once you've done it. But you get a lot of people where they've done this for like 2 days and then they don't see a return on it and move on. And it takes figuring out the math to be able to really figure out whether or not something works. And a lot of times it takes 1,000 or more emails and touch points and everything else. But when you break down the math, even on that cold lead list, that really only worked out to about 7 emails a day. So it's not like you were spending 20 hours a day trying to figure out how to do this. I think sometimes for a lot of people, it sounds overwhelming, but when you break it down, it's doing a little bit here, a little bit there, and then measuring the math and being consistent about it. So one of the questions I have too, and you've been in technology as I have for a lot of years, you're much more accomplished, I promise, than I ever would be, but built a lot of systems. And, when we do this at the corporate level, what you did as well, these, in a corporation, most of the time the systems get built and people use them. What we often obviously see a lot of speakers do is they go after, and I say speakers, a lot of entrepreneurs do this in all forms of business, but they'll go buy a CRM or a system and it starts collecting dust really quickly. So in your advice, how should someone go about, one, setting up the processes with their technology and then making the commitment to implement it? And because I tell people all the time, I don't even care what CRM you get. There's no reason to change it if you haven't used the other 3 you've bought and then they just collected dust and you've wasted money. But a lot of people get overwhelmed by trying to set up those systems and processes and then set them up and implement them, which is why it's great to sometimes have other people come in and set it up for you. But again, kind of roll with that and tell them what your thoughts on CRMs and other technology systems that people need to be able to create lead gen efficiently and well.
I am a firm believer that outbound marketing and outbound selling is a numbers game. And as a numbers game, you have to have somewhere to keep your numbers. Otherwise, you just have no way to know whether or not it's working or not. And that if you don't know whether it's working or not, you don't know whether to keep doing it. And you have to be willing to kind of, I have kind of a 6-month rule, which is, I commit to everything for 6 months, and I figure within 6 months, I should be able to tell. And of course, I can make exceptions, but in my mind, I'm always like 6 months. We're going to do this for 6 months, and I'll know at the end of 6 months if it's making progress, if it's headed in the right direction, if it's not headed in the right direction. Our email sequence alone is a 6 to 8 week email sequence. So we don't actually know. We don't call a lead dead for 2 months, nearly 2 months. So there's no way that we could do it for a day or 2 or even a week or even a couple of weeks and be like, this isn't working. There's so many factors that go into outbound selling. Like you have to get to the right person at the right time, and you have to know what you're trying to get to at every stage of the game. And so I agree that it doesn't matter what system you're using, as long as you know what you're tracking. And in fact, the person, so I actually had somebody who was helping me with the outbound leads and the, kind of monitoring and managing that process for me. And I wrote everything for the process, and their job was just to execute on the process and basically to do the day-to-day. But again, if you want to hire somebody to do that, or whether you're doing it yourself, you've got to track the numbers to know whether or not that's a good way to investment, whether that's your time that you're investing or whether it's your money that you're investing, either way. So we needed to know, right, if we're sending out these emails, we needed to know, are we getting the response? Are people looking at the emails? Are they opening the emails? Are they responding to the emails? Which email got us the best response so that we could make sure that the messaging was right on the emails? Otherwise, how are you going to know? So in terms of systems, yes, you need one. Absolutely. I will shamelessly say SpeakerFlow CRM because I built it for this very reason. And now it's run by the team at SpeakerFlow, and they do an incredible job of it. But there was there has to be a place that is your scoreboard. Otherwise, you just don't know whether or not you're winning at the game.
Now for a little speaking trivia. According to a recent publication by Bigspeak for Keynote Speaking Trends in 2025, what are the top 5 most requested topics for professional speakers? Back with the answer in just a moment. Before we jump back to the show, here's a moment with NSA member, speaker, and author Fotini Ikonomopoulos. Fotini, what does being part of NSA mean to you and your speaking business?
So NSA to me means community. And I spend a lot of time and money to come down to NSA events, even though I live in Canada, because it's a group of peers, people I can learn from, people I can share ideas with, people who motivate me and inspire me and are role models for me to watch out for, and just genuinely enjoy the connections and being surrounded by some of the cream of the crop of the industry. That for me is about personal growth. And it also means it's going to help me grow my business in so many ways.
And here's the answer. According to a recent publication by Bigspeak for Keynote Speaking Trends in 2025, the top 5 most requested topics are artificial intelligence, leadership, adversity/resilience, inspiration, and storytelling. And now back to the show. Tell us what you are going to be speaking about at Influence.
So at Influence, I'm going to be talking about, I have a breakout session called From Crickets to Cash, Building a Systematic Lead Generation Process for a Speaking Business. And it's really going to be me talking about, one, what are the triggers that make people buy? So how do you identify the right kind of leads and what's the quality of those leads? I said there were 4 elements that make up a great lead. And that is the fees that they pay. That is the date of the event. So it's the fees, the association or company. Do I know who that is? Do I have a contact so I can find the right person? And then when's the actual event? So those are kind of the 4 elements. Based on those 4 elements, how do we fill the bucket from those 4 elements? And I can work from any one of those elements and fill the rest of them around. And I'm going to be explaining all of that at Influence. And then also I'm going to talk about my concept of a revenue fountain instead of a revenue stream. So, I always hear people talk about revenue streams, and I've always talked about that as well. But I really love to think about my business, particularly the sales part of my business, as being a fountain, which is what am I doing that is recirculating and putting people back into the top of my funnel or back into new funnels, so that I'm not always having to find brand new leads, but I'm finding ways to keep my leads circulating.
There's a question I want to ask you from a previous guest. What has been 1 or 2 pieces of advice or information, some really amazing nuggets of value that you got that totally changed the way you do your business, your speaking business, and changed it for the better?
One of those pieces of advice would absolutely be to be where your buyers are. I think we can get distracted a lot, and we can get sucked into Facebook, or we can get sucked into, attending networking events because it, gives us a lot of kudos and a lot of pats on the back, and it's very, instantly gratifying. But if that's not where your target market is, it is not where you need to be investing your time or energy. And sometimes saying no to things is much more important than saying yes to them.
Great point. Well, what is a question that you would like to ask a future guest on this show?
I think I would love to ask, what is the one strategy that you have used in sales that changes the way you sell?
That's great. All right, well, let's do a quick recap then based on Julie's lead gen advice. Number 1, lead gen can go quiet really fast. Out of sight and out of mind can be crickets chirping. Your business, your speaking business, has to be treated like a business. And those decisions, like Julie made, were created on purpose. Collateral messaging and all the pieces get built. Takes a little time, but you got to go find the leads. Treat lead generation as your business as well. Number 2, inbound is gravy. It's great, like Southern biscuits and gravy, but it's not always consistent, and you often need to do more. It often takes outreach. She's created 4 elements to help find and qualify the leads. More importantly, though, it's feeling comfortable about doing the outreach, and you got to be where the buyers are. Number 3, She says outbound marketing and outbound selling, it's a numbers game. She commits to it for 6 months before measuring. So measure what matters and take the time commitment needed to measure it. Just make sure when you get a system that you commit to it and don't let it collect dust before you decide on another new system. Julie, I'm looking forward to seeing you at Influence. Any last closing thoughts before we speak ourselves off this stage?
Nope. Run your business on purpose.
Fantastic. Friends, make sure to join us at Speakernomics.com and let your voice be heard. I'm Kenneth Short-Kinney, your host of the National Speakers Association's podcast, Speakernomics, and this has been another fantastic episode of the show. Thank you, Julie, for your service to NSA and for lending your voice to the show. And to everyone listening, thank you for the privilege of your time. And remember, Speakernomics is a podcast where you'll learn to speak, get paid, repeat.